Welcome, dear friends. As we continue this 17th year of the Turner Winter Series, held for the first 15 years at Chautauqua Institution, I am grateful to add my welcome this year to Greg's when he joins us, as we welcome with delight those of you who are here with us this evening in the socially distancing comfort of the Kappa Theater and the Robert H. Jackson Center, as well as those who will enjoy this program virtually. It is my great pleasure to begin our conversation with a brief introduction of our wonderful guest, Sherra Babcock, after which I will turn the conversation over to our perennial host and the founder of this series, Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Sherra Babcock retired in 2017 from the Chautauqua Institution, where she served for 10 years and 11 seasons as Vice President and the Emily and Richard Smuckers Chair for Education. In this position, she planned the 1045 lecture platform, introduced and served as interlocutor for many of the speakers, and managed the literary program, which includes the CLSC, that is, the Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle, as well as the Writer Center and the Literary Journal, and also the Chautauqua Prize, which she founded. Sherra also supervised the professionals at the Smith Library, the Oliver Archives, the Boys and Girls Club, the Children's School, and the Young Readers Program. As her colleague during those years, I will wholeheartedly attest to her collegiality and cooperative work with other Chautauqua programs and services in her position on the President's senior staff. It was such a pleasure to work with you, Sherra. Sherra and her husband, Jim, have made their home here in Lakewood. They are associate members of First Presbyterian Church, where Sherra has served on the Personnel Committee, and Jim is a leader in the Aging and Saging group. Sherra is also a mentor for the Coalition of Chautauqua County Women and Girls and serves on the program committee for the Robert H. Jackson Center. The Babcocks love travel and celebrated Sherra's retirement with an 11-and-a-half-month drive trip around the U.S. and Western Canada. Their 4 daughters are grown and include 2 nurse practitioners, a disability rights officer at the Environmental Protection Agency, and a Foreign Service diplomat currently serving with USAID in Moldova. They have 9 grandchildren, and their oldest will deliver their first great-grandchild this summer. So wonderful. And now, with that lovely background, I'm going to ask you to please join me in welcoming Sherra Babcock and Greg Peterson.
I'm Southern.
Well, we'll bring that up here. Just a second. Are we on it? We're rolling. Okay, we're rolling. Okay, good. So you heard while I was talking to Jim that I thought, it was just my presumption that you were attracted to him because of his Union, his great-grandfather being a Union general, but you told me differently.
I'm Southern. I'm not really proud of that, but I am Southern, and it was kind of a shock for my family, who is very Southern on both sides, to welcome the great-grandson of a Union general. They would be horrified to learn that there was any relationship with Sherman, too.
Yeah, exactly.
The March to the Sea was not the most popular event of the Civil War.
Tell me about your mom and dad. What'd they do?
Oh, my mom and dad are wonderful people. My dad is still living. He's 94. He's a retired United Methodist minister. In fact, he came up here last summer and rented a house and brought my brother and brought Jim and I up to the grounds, and we had a lovely week at Chautauqua with him. He's always been my hero. My mom died in 2017. She had Alzheimer's, and so the last few years were really difficult. But she was the daughter of a United Methodist minister also. So that's my family. I grew up in the Methodist Church and in the South in Texas, but both families one family came from Alabama, the other came from Mississippi, and met in Texas. Special people. Thanks for asking about them.
Well, so you're a Methodist, obviously Bishop Vincent Methodist, I mean. it's just-
Absolutely. I thought it was a little bit of kismet when I learned more about Chautauqua. I knew the Chautauqua concept. In fact, my dad had Chautauqua Sunday nights in his churches when I was a little girl. That had been started by a minister in Dallas who had Chautauqua summer programs that involved learning something that was not necessarily religious, but having it in the church and having art, having music, and presenting it as a program of the church. So I was always familiar with that concept, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. I'd never been here when I was called about interviewing for the job at Chautauqua, and I may be jumping ahead of myself, but
Well, the bottom
Maureen-
line is there's a Methodist connect there in all of this.
Absolutely. And-
Kismet but you're an SMU, you're a Mustang,
well, graduate school.
graduate school.
And yes, I grew up with a little T-shirt as a little girl that said, "I'm a little Mustang from SMU." My dad is a graduate of the theology school there.
Okay.
So, but and I went to graduate school there. I went undergraduate to a school in Texas, a small liberal arts college named Southwestern, which also has a Methodist connection.
Did you have, what was your major?
In undergrad, it was American Studies, which, again, that's a funny story about Chautauqua. After I accepted the job here, I went back to some event at Southwestern and ran into the man who was then the head of American Studies. I had the first degree in American Studies. I kind of created it with one of my faculty members. But ran into the fellow who was currently the chair of American Studies and said, 37 years later, I have a job in the field.
Yeah.
And that was another part of my interest in Chautauqua, was just the whole combination of social history and social movements, and that's what I had studied. I have a graduate degree, I have an MBA.
You got your MBA, and I'm reading the bio, Senior Vice President, Bloom Agency, which is in advertising and marketing, Dallas. Cowboys, probably a fan.
Nope.
No? That's good. This is good. I was going in the wrong direction. That's good.
I stopped being a Dallas Cowboys fan when Jerry Jones fired Tom Landry.
Ah, good for you, good for you.
And when I told Tom Becker that, he said, "You have a long memory." Yes, I do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good, that's good. Cowboys we're in Buffalo area, they're the Antichrist.
Yes.
And then they went to Southwestern University for 11 years. And then what caused you to even look at an application for Chautauqua?
Well, it's another sort of interesting, to me, story. But it's a story of finding opportunities sort of accidentally. I went to Southwestern because I had realized after 20 years in advertising, I really wasn't going to make much difference in the history of the world, and I could. And I was looking for a position in higher ed in advancement, because I thought that the skills that I had in advertising would be translatable. But the president of Southwestern, who had introduced me to a lot of different schools, had an opening with the dean of students position. And he said, I just started thinking about it, and he said, that's a supervisory experience, and it's a personality experience, and you have to learn what you're doing. And so he said, I would like for you to try this and see if this isn't better for you than what you think you're looking for. And so I had been in that position for 11 years, but left to start a company of my own, which was advising university presidents, particularly liberal arts universities, and in transition in student affairs. And the situation was very frequently, when you lost your chief student affairs officer in a liberal arts college, there wasn't anybody else to just step in. So I did that and worked for a couple of years at St. Lawrence University up in upstate New York, and Dan Sullivan is a Chautauquan.
Right.
So they had an opening here, and they called him to say who does he know in higher ed? They said they thought they might find me or find this position in higher ed. And he said, well, I know somebody, but I'm helping her build a business. And so he didn't even mention it to me. And then they called him back a year later and said, you said you knew somebody, we want to talk to that person. And so so he called in, and I love what he said, and Maureen is going to laugh, and other colleagues from Chautauqua will laugh. He said, you'll be real busy in the summertime, but it's pretty cushy in the winter. I have told him several times how wrong he was about that.
Yeah.
And that wasn't, but anyway, that's how I got here. He nominated me and I interviewed, and it was, I loved the idea, and apparently they liked me, and so it was a really lovely match.
Had you been here before?
No.
So this was really
No.
a new area.
It was new. I knew about it. I had friends who had been here, and
Sure.
as I said, I was aware of the concept. But it was brand new, and all the discovery was just amazingly wonderful.
What was the title that they were posting at the time that you took the job?
I think it was Director of Education. They weren't clear about it when they called me, and I think somebody told me it was a vice presidential spot. I think it was represented to me that way. When I found out it wasn't, and I understood why it wasn't, it was okay, but I was later promoted to VP, and then later given the Emily and Richard Smuckers Chair.
Now, this type of job was previously Dick Reddington, wasn't it?
Yes.
That was Dick.
The job has changed a
Right.
lot with all the different people who have been in it. And in fact, right now, there are probably 3 or 4 people at the institution who have pieces of the job that I had. But the Emily and Richard Smuckers Chair is held by Matt Ewalt. But there's now a director of the literary arts program, Sony Tonami, and Deborah Sunea Moore has a little piece of it, I think, in terms of the senior staff position, so.
So at the time, Tom was the president, Tom Becker.
Mm-hmm.
So Tom's the president, and he'd been the president for, let's see, this has been 3 or 4 years?
This was his 4th year.
4th year.
When I came.
And so, did you get a sense that they were sort of likewise transitioning some of the more senior people at a time? It was sort of a,
Well, Tom was very clear with me that he wanted me to do some things that he didn't have the time to do. And specifically, he wanted that literary arts program, the whole thing. He wanted it lifted up to be, in fact, it's the oldest program of the institution. The CLSC is the oldest affinity group, and it's the oldest arts program. And he wanted that to be much more further developed. Tom loved the lecture platform, but he didn't have the time to do as much with it as he had when he was in a more linear position. And so he wanted to be sure that he trusted somebody to really keep the lecture platform at the level it had been. And we think, both of us think that we together made a difference in the lecture platform, enjoyed doing it, worked together a lot and worked separately a lot, but developing some of the partnerships that are still in line, National Geographic, the Center for Strategic and Intelligence Studies, Brookings, some of the relationships we have there, the American Enterprise Institute. We did those things together.
did Tom, I hate to say he, but one of the things that is unique to Chautauqua is they have theme weeks.
Yes,
And 9 weeks, 9 separate themes.
Yes.
I don't know when that started, but I think that was probably during Bratton's era.
could have been, I'm not sure. It was here when I came.
Yeah.
But it was another thing that I grabbed from my past, because one of the things we had at Southwestern University was something called the Brown Symposium. And it was an annual event where there were faculty members, the Brown, it was from the company Brown and Root. The Brown family had endowed this event, and the Brown chairs rotated. And so every year they had about a 5-day program that was, again, trying to bring the wholeness of the liberal arts around a singular topic. And so being able to have experienced that, and it was really easy for me to tell my friends in Texas, oh, I'm just doing 9 Brown Symposia every summer. And they knew what that was, and they were somewhat astounded because of course, that was my main focus, but for them, it was a year in the planning, so.
Well, yeah, let's pull back the curtain a little bit, because we do see during the current season at Chautauqua often an announcement of next year's theme weeks, which means somebody had to think about this a year, 2 years in advance. How does that work? Does somebody just throw up a whiteboard and say, let's throw?
Well, we had a committee, and I won't name them because I will forget someone, but Maureen was part of it in religion. We had a committee that came up, each of us came up with 3 or 4 or 5 different ideas, maybe more, and we wrestled over it from about, I'd say October until January, a year and a half in advance of the summer. And we did that because we wanted to announce the themes. We wanted to plant some seeds in the spring with some of our meetings in DC and New York and other places. And we also wanted to announce all the themes in June so that people could decide what was the most interesting theme for them and make a decision about when they wanted to come to the institution for that summer. And because most of the visitors to Chautauqua during the summer are one-week visitors, and they choose a variety of reasons, but one of them is what the theme is for that week.
As you're looking at 9 weeks of themes, some of it are often topical, but you also might think that's not popular. I mean, how much does that play in the conversation, saying, gee, this would be terrific for the world to talk about this issue, but we know nobody probably will show up to listen to it?
Well, we know there are people who just trusted us. They knew that whatever it was that we were going to do, it was going to be done well, and it was going to be done in an interesting fashion. But yes, there were some that we knew might not be popular. There were some also particularly in the Foreign Affairs Week, which we didn't have one every summer, but many times we got on a line of theming that involved countries that nobody knows that much about, but that we thought were going to be becoming important, and usually we thought things were really beginning to break for them. Those countries, and again, I probably will forget some, but they were Turkey and Brazil, to the point that when we named one, I think it was when we named Brazil, we said, Egypt. We named Egypt as they were rising in the Arab Spring. We had some fabulous speakers that were planning to come. And in that year and a half between the time that we chose Egypt and we actually executed, Egypt had fallen apart. And then Turkey, Erdogan became somewhat of a tyrant instead of the rising kind of liberal democracy guy we thought he was. So when we named Brazil, we said, do you think we ought to call them and warn them? And in fact, that was the year that, I'm trying to remember her name, the president got involved in some kind of scandal and was summarily thrown out. Again, she was a person that looked like it was going to be a really interesting story. So yes, not always choosing the most popular, and some things just needed to be done. Some things we needed to talk about. And while tried very hard to present all the legitimate representations of the topic that we were studying. We had some conflict sometimes with people at Chautauqua. For example, when we had the week on Darwin and Linnaeus, we chose not to present the position about creationism, and we got some criticism for that. But we did not feel that it was supported scientifically. And we got some Chautauquans felt that we did not do our job in that we didn't present that. If I were doing that week again, I'd do it the same way.
Yeah.
But yes, we had, and I'm sure they still do have lots of opinions. And there are lots of people who think that their brother-in-law should be invited to speak. So,
Chautauquans have opinions? Are you kidding me? This is such a shock. Well, you were the face. You were the face of the platform, in the sense that the people who showed up, if it was great, Tom would take a bow. If it was not so great, well, it's Sherra decided. I'm kidding. But
I am too.
yeah. But the point is, they knew that you were the person who was kind of intimately involved. If may not have had the final say, but nevertheless, you were the 10:45 lecturers.
Yeah.
Somehow Sherra Babcock had to sign off.
Exactly.
And
It was heady.
huh?
It was heady.
Yeah. Did that? I mean, it's a 24-hour job, and talk to me about kind of a normal week. I mean, in many senses, we know Chautauqua's hectic, but you got 5 people that you're directly responsible for, aside from other programming that, whether it's the archives, the heritage, John Schmitz, all this other stuff's going on. It's you. Ultimately, you're the buck stops with you, because that's your title.
We had some interesting stories around that too, Greg. But typical week in the summertime, we would be dealing with the people who were coming for the rest of the summer, because they were changing their planes and bringing an extra guest or not, or deciding, it didn't happen often, but it did happen where they would learn in advance that they couldn't make it. Usually, if we had some problem with somebody making it, it was that day.
Yeah.
So we would also be dealing with the people who are coming in today, greeting them, making sure they were comfortable, making sure that the people who were coming in on Tuesday were going to be here on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, plus looking ahead at the whole rest of the summer. We had emergencies where planes didn't arrive, or people couldn't be there. I can tell you some of those stories if you want them.
Sure, I'd be delighted.
One that comes to mind was we had Deavere McKesson, who was one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter the first year that was a thing. And he was arrested in Louisiana on Friday night, and he was to open the week on Monday. And so his people called and said he's in jail, and he was arrested falsely. It was a matter of, did he step over a line in a parade permit for a demonstration he was leading? And he did not. You could see it but they arrested him nonetheless. And they said, we think he'll be out and he'll be there. That's wonderful. Then on Saturday, they said, well, they're not going to have the hearing until Sunday, and it's going to be a temporary hearing. And then on Sunday, they said, well, he has been released, but he can't leave the state. And he's been released pending trial. So Sunday night, we were looking at how are we going to open this week on Monday morning. It happened that the religion department had Bill Moyers set up to do the 2:00 lectures. And they had Andrew Young, and Andrew Young was early. I think he wasn't going to speak until Tuesday or Wednesday. And they had, as a pastor, they had Raphael Warnock, who's now the senator from Georgia, and Raphael's wife, who was a doctoral student, and she was studying the civil rights movement. So we put the four of them together on the stage on Monday to open the week and say, why do we need to be talking about this right now? And people in the audience were saying, this is the B team.
Yeah,
And surely it was not the B team, but it was what we did instead of having this one speaker. It was so interesting because Andrew Young had kind of mellowed in his years and was kind of dealing with the Black Lives Matter as kind of he didn't use the word whippersnapper, but he could have. These young people who are getting out ahead of themselves.
Yeah.
And this very young, very pregnant Mrs. Warnock said, I am so disappointed to hear you say that. And so they had this really interesting conversation that was generational.
Yeah.
And another time we had a young man, it was the week we had on Egypt, we had a young man coming from Stanford. We had met him, and he was on the ground during the I call it a revolution in Egypt. And he had lost an eye in one of the, and he was, again, a very young person who was very likely one of the leaders that was upcoming in Egypt. And he was coming from Stanford. He missed his plane. So he took a later one, got on a rent car, called and said, I'm coming, but I'm driving, and I don't know exactly where I'm going. And so we had to plan a completely different program. Robin Wright was to interview him, and she stayed up all night with another advanced person who we were just going to switch them, and planned a whole new program. And this young man showed up at about 9:30 for our 10:45 lecture. So we had in our wings two wonderful programs, and he told a story on the stage that he had to get a rent car company. He didn't have a credit card, and so he had to get them to trust him that he would pay for the rental car. And I had all these people that day calling my office saying, you need to pay for his rent car. It was like, yes, we know, we will pay for his rent car. But it was just interesting things like that happen.
On the grounds, I mean, you can't, sometimes people, they miss things, they don't get their visa, they don't get their green card. I know that happened not once or a couple times. I don't know the names, but that happened. Do you have a B list, people who you know are on the grounds that you could just kind of draw from?
Yes, but they're not always there. And sometimes we have people that we can call to come in from somewhere. But it's, every one of those is different. And it really didn't happen that much. I told you two. I didn't tell you one that didn't create a problem, but it was funny. I got a call one day, we were having a week on the Supreme Court, and I got a call in my office from the gate saying, there are these two people here who say that they're supposed to speak. One of them's name is Marshall, and one of them's name is Kennedy. I said, would that be U.S. Marshal George Smith, who was we did know from Buffalo, he's the guy that is in charge out here in Western New York when the Supreme Court justices come, and of course Anthony Kennedy. I said, would it be Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy and U.S. Marshal George Smith? They said, oh, I think so. I said, please let them in.
Yeah.
Please let them in. It wasn't a problem, but it was a funny story.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. When you're, again, creating programs, sometimes you know it's a home run. Roger Rosenblatt's, you get that week, it was inevitably a home run. Did you just, as you conceptualize that with Roger, did you say, bring us your 5 best friends? Or did he actually suggest people and you had the ability to say yes or no?
Yes. We didn't say no often, because Roger has such fabulous friends. But there were times when we would say, and I will tell Roger that that's what came up. I'm still in touch with him, and he is such a wonderful, kind man. But we had a couple that I, of course, won't mention, that we kind of steered him away to say, that one is probably not going to be that appealing at Chautauqua. There was another one that we worried about it the whole time planning, but it sounded like such an interesting idea, and it turned out to be one of the best programs we ever put on, just from an emotional standpoint. So we ended up there was one week, this was another Roger week, that it ended up really not being so much about literature as it was about long, loving marriages. We had, Roger was there, of course, and his wife Jenny. She's never on the stage, but we had Alan and Alda and his wife Arlene, and we had Jane Pauley and Gary Trudeau, and we had Alan and Marilyn Bergman. Marilyn just passed away about 2 or 3 weeks ago, but they wrote the soundtrack for our lives in the movie soundtracks of the 1980s. And so a lot of the conversation ended up being about long and loving relationships. So sometimes we would have those serendipitous kind of events.
You were bringing people in. Was there an awe factor with anybody that you brought in? I mean, here you're professional, arm's length, contracts, all the negotiations, all the stuff. You got a file like this, and you'd say, when they come and you meet them, it's like, hi. Was there any starstruck?
Yes, and it might surprise you, Anna Deavere Smith. I had admired her theatrical work for, I don't know, for 20, 30 years. At the work that she did trying to understand these crises. And she may be a name that people recognize, she may not be, but she would go into a crisis in the country and try to understand all the points of view. And she did Fires in the Mirror, which was the story of the Watts riots. She did the Crown Heights story when and more lately she's done work on healthcare and on the school to prison pipeline. And I was just in awe of her ability to enact all of these. And we invited her to speak about what she did on the morning platform, and then to present one on the evening program, because it was a theatrical performance. And I felt like I was just, another person that I just adored was E.L. Doctorow. Ragtime has always been my favorite novel.
Mine too.
Oh, really? Okay. And when he came, I was just awestruck. In fact, I was driving him to the president's cottage for a dinner, and his wife saw this bird fluttering, caught in a sailboat's, whatever you call the strings, and she was so distressed about it. I told her, I will take care of this. So I was going to the dinner also. So I dropped them off so that they could visit with people. I went back to the boat. I called the police, and then I discovered that it was a fake bird.
Oh, no kidding.
But I was going to take care of it for Helen.
You did. You did.
It was one to, keep the real birds out of the netting.
Oh, cool.
Other duties as assigned.
Well, you sit down and you talk in the off-season with Tom and the committee about saying, here's an idea, and Tom says to you, go pursue it. Go get on a plane, go pursue something. We know when you succeed, we see that, the benefits of it there. Were there one or two that just, you didn't get it into the end zone that you can talk about now? Where you had an idea and said, I'm going to make this, I want to make this happen. I went, I saw, and I didn't conquer.
Well, one that comes to mind that I've already mentioned is Egypt.
Yep.
That week was supposed to be a story about comparing what was happening in Egypt at that time to our American Revolution, and it was being done in conjunction with Colonial Williamsburg. And of course, by the time we got there, it wasn't happening, and there wasn't any connection with why is Colonial Williamsburg here? Because we had this plan that didn't happen politically. Now, talk about failure of a week. I see Maureen sitting over there. She might remind me of one that I'm not thinking about right now, because that's a great question.
Cuba.
Yeah, Cuba. That was a pretty interesting one, because we thought we had more connections there than we did. And we were unable to get people out of Cuba to come and people that we thought could probably come and do a good job. Some of the people that we had very thick accents, which that's an issue for the audience. I think sometimes, and I have said to audience members sometimes, he speaks much better English than I do Spanish. And would you rather hear about somebody who was right in the middle of whatever it is they were talking about, or would you rather have somebody talking about it that you can understand better? Yeah. And my position was always, if they are more understandable, if it's possible to understand them, we should have the person. But that's not what everyone in the audience agrees with. But the Spanish accent is particularly difficult for our audience and for our sound systems. So.
You also got involved with, you mentioned the CLSC, you got involved with the Oliver Archives, and there was programming really with all of those related, the brown bag, the presentation, the heritage lecture. Did you get deep into those as well?
It kind of depends. That's a good question. John Schmitz is a wonderful archivist, and he pretty much runs the programs coming out of the Oliver Archives. He would. I always knew he would come through with a wonderful list, and he would talk about them as he was developing. I suppose I had veto power, but I don't think I ever used it. CLSC was another matter. CLSC was we did not have a literary director at the time, so I functioned as that. So I chose the authors. I had some help with, I had some seasonal help with putting the reviews together, and certainly we work as such a team. The bookstore is a very active team in selling books and making the book signings happen and that kind of thing. But I chose the authors. I met with them ahead of time. I introduced them, and I chose the books. So those are probably two different sides. Matt Ewalt, who followed me into my position, pretty much ran the Boys and Girls Club by himself. I had veto power, but I didn't use it. I greeted all the staff, and I greeted all the teachers in the children's school, but those ran so well that I was nominally in charge, but I didn't get down in the real planning of their programs. I did do one thing with all the education programs, and that was to try to move them more into a cohesive involvement with theme. With special studies, we tried to have more special studies programs that related to the theme. With children's school, my goal with children's school and Boys and Girls Club was if the whole family could talk about the same topic over the dinner table, I would feel like we had done now sometimes it just doesn't work when you're talking about nuclear disarmament. 3-year-olds don't have a place, but something about another country might. So that was something, again, that I knew that was one of the reasons why Tom wanted me to take the job, because he had a sense that I could do that, and it would be a more unified programming all the way around.
When I think of Sherra Babcock, I think of the Chautauqua Writers Center, I think of the Chautauqua Prize. I mean, that really were things that you either established or advanced tremendously. Are those kind of highlight stuff for you?
They are dear, dear, dear to my heart. Writer Center was an interesting situation because it had been, the founders of the Writer Center had been running it as a separate private event for 20 years when I came. And they had gone to Tom and said, we would like to be taken over as an institution program because we want it to last forever, and we know it will. And so that was one of my task, was to blend the Writer Center in as an institutional program as opposed to a separate program. And it was an interesting task because not everybody knew that was the way it was. They wanted it to be. The prize was something that Tom sent me to visit with a man one time. In fact, I just told his wife this story a couple of weeks ago. Didn't tell me why, but this gentleman had suggested to Tom that we should have a literary prize. And he had some connections into the literary world that would help with that, including access to a foundation that could do some of the funding. And so I went to meet this man, found him to be just a wonderful human being. And so he presented this idea of the Chautauqua Prize as if he'd never mentioned it before. And I said, I'd love to take that on. And so he got the initial funding for it, and I had a prize on my hand, and it was supposed to be, we were going to start it 2 seasons away because we had to get entries. We had to figure out how we were going to run it. And so I talked to people with the National Book Award, with the Man Booker in England, with the some of the PEN Awards, with the National Book Critics Circle Awards, and I thought I would learn how a book award was handled and I would do it. Well, every one of them said to me, well, this is your prize, how are you going to do it? So we had to write all the way it happens, what are the, how does the process work, how do you enter, who enters, what kind of, how do we choose the books, and so all of that. And it was such a fulfilling opportunity to leave that prize in its 9th year maybe, when I retired, and it was pretty well established, and it worked, and we fine-tuned it as we went along. But some of the people who are now entering their books as a nominee for the Chautauqua Prize are just amazing, and I think they have over 100 first-line readers, and they are all Chautauquans who have professional experience with books.
Oh.
They're librarians, they're booksellers, they're writers themselves, published writers themselves. They teach literature at the college level, and those are all our first-line readers. And then there's a short list that is selected out of those a long list, then a short list, and then the winner. And I guess that's what I'm most proud of in terms of something that I can say I did.
You did,
So,
you did. And for those that, it's referred to as the Chautauqua Prize, an annual national literary award for books that provide a richly rewarding reading experience.
yes.
And that's you, Sherra Babcock. We've been cruising along about your 10 years here at Chautauqua and touched a few spots, but I would be remiss if I didn't say, Sherra, what's the question you were expecting me to ask, or an area which I should be touching on that I haven't, because I don't want to lose this opportunity.
Oh, this is fun, Greg. I've always admired your interviewing skills, and I've always enjoyed the opportunity to hear you interview people. And I guess I came to this without trying to prepare for the questions, because I've seen that you draw out of people interesting facts. I will tell you that I had a friend last week, though, who said, one friend who said she was definitely coming, and another friend who said, why is he interviewing you? And I said, well, I don't know. He just invited me. And one said, well, she had a pretty big job at Chautauqua, and people like her. And she said again, but yeah, what's he going to ask you? So I don't see anything that you ignored. I don't.
So we heard an awful lot earlier today about Orville Babcock through Jim Babcock. How'd you guys meet?
Oh, we met at work. It was in advertising, and Jim was looking for a new account executive for the Six Flags Over Texas account, and I had worked at that agency in a clerical role, and I had moved to Houston and had started working in the professional account management, account service work, and my mentor said, Jim, I know who needs to handle this account for you. And he said, after interviewing me, which is interesting, she seems very smart and she's very engaging, but she doesn't have any packaged goods experience. And that's kind of the story of my life. I have taken on things that I wasn't experienced in, and sort of made them my own, but that's how we met. I went to work for him, and then he was promoted and I was promoted, and we were on different accounts, and we decided he didn't ask me out. He asked me to help him meet people, and I asked him out.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, those A personality women, Jim, I'm fully aware of them, let me tell you. Well, Sherra, this has been special. There's much of which, people on the grounds are always curious about, again, behind the curtain, where the administration, and at that time, Tom was the president, and of course, you were right there as a vice president. I think that was the other title there. And who else were those kind of top-tier people there?
Buildings and grounds and facilities, Charlie Hines. The director of religion was Joan Brown Campbell. Of course, Jeff Follansby was in advancement. Sebi Bajano was the business treasurer. Marty was head of the programming. Marty was fun to work with. That has a whole bunch of other stories attached to it. Help me. You're taking me back to I think that might have been it.
All right, but we'll just drop, but we got to kind of give me a Marty Merkley story with regards to Friday night. Of course, Friday night, he was in charge of programming on all the evenings, but Friday night's showtime. I mean, that's the preeminent spot where the whole community knows who's coming that Friday night. And there must be a story or two of somebody who just didn't show up or was less than shockingly
I've
difficult.
heard some, but they precede me.
Ah,
But I can tell you another Marty story.
Okay, go
And
ahead.
that was right after I retired. I was meeting Matt Ewalt for lunch at Webb's. And I walked in and I said, I'm meeting a young man, and I don't know if he's here yet. And they led me to Marty. And Marty said, well, that's a compliment. He was waiting for somebody else.
Yeah.
And of course, Marty retired before I did, but he always was that young person. And I can't tell you any of his stories, except that he was just a great colleague.
well, Marty, we also, you now, as of tonight, you enter this pantheon of Chautauqua alums, of which is long and distinguished, and including Marty.
Uh-huh.
And off camera, I'll tell you a couple stories also
Okay,
that he did this
I
as well.
look forward to that.
Well, Sherra, thank you. Thank you ever so much. This is
This
fabulous.
has been real fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Now we know more about your husband as well.
True.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great.